Most car companies don't die with a headline. They don't end with applause. They don't even end with a good car. They usually end quietly, a factory still running, workers still clocking in, a final vehicle rolling off the line that nobody realizes will be the last. Between 1949 and 2006, dozens of automakers reached that moment, not with a legend, not with a flagship, but with an ordinary car that unknowingly carried the weight of an entire company's history. This is not a story about the best cars ever made. It's a story about the last ones. In the years after World War II, America was overflowing with car companies. Starting an automaker in the late 1940s was almost like launching a startup. The barriers were low, optimism was high, and demand seemed endless. Some companies chased efficiency, others chased luxury. A few chased ideas that were simply too early for the world around them. Many of those names disappeared almost as fast as they arrived. Their final cars weren't bold statements, they were compromises, built with shrinking budgets, aging tooling, and fading confidence. Yet those last cars are often the most revealing. They show us exactly what went wrong. Take the tiny manufacturers of the late 1940s and early 1950s, companies that believed America wanted smaller, simpler transportation after the war. Some built ultralight microcars with aluminum bodies and engines barely strong enough to keep up with traffic. On paper, they made sense. In reality, they had no dealer networks, no marketing power, and no protection when demand shifted toward bigger, faster cars. Their final vehicles weren't failures of engineering, they were failures of timing. In other cases, the last car was beautiful, expensive, and doomed from the start. Luxury-focused companies tried to survive by selling fewer cars at higher prices, believing exclusivity would save them. Hand-built interiors, wood trim, unique body styles. But without scale, every sale became a loss. When founders died or funding dried up, the final car left the factory almost unnoticed, often unfinished. Some of these final vehicles now sit in museums. Others vanished completely. Then there were the innovators, brands that introduced ideas decades ahead of the industry, disc brakes before the market was ready, electric cars before charging infrastructure existed, fiberglass bodies when steel still ruled. Their last cars weren't obsolete, they were misunderstood. History often punishes the early adopter. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, consolidation accelerated. The Big Three tightened their grip. Independent automakers struggled to compete on cost, safety regulations, and advertising. Many tried to reinvent themselves at the last minute, spinning off sub-brands or redesigning entire lineups overnight. The final cars of this era often look strangely restrained. No wild styling, no bold experiments. Just an attempt to blend in, to survive one more year. One brand's final car was a station wagon so rare that only a few dozen were ever built. Another ended with a sedan that looked almost anonymous, stripped of the controversial styling that once defined it. These cars weren't meant to be remembered. They were meant to stop the bleeding. By the 1970s, a new pressure arrived. Fuel shortages, emissions regulations, safety standards. Some companies responded with radical ideas. Others froze. A few bet everything on a single solution. The last cars of the 1970s often reflect desperation disguised as innovation. Ultra-basic electric city cars, safety-first sports cars with heavy doors and unconventional materials. Vehicles that tried to answer a changing world but arrived too late, too expensive, or too compromised. These final cars weren't bad ideas, they were unfinished answers to difficult questions. In the 1980s, global competition reshaped the industry again. European brands entered the American market and quietly left when expectations didn't align. Domestic brands experimented with imported platforms, rebadging foreign cars in hopes of survival. The last cars of this decade often feel confused. European in spirit but American in execution. Technologically advanced but plagued by reliability issues. Comfortable but overpriced. Many buyers never understood what these cars were supposed to be. By the time the 1990s arrived, nostalgia itself became a business model. Some companies tried to survive by building cars that looked backward instead of forward. Neoclassic roadsters, retro luxury coupes, vehicles designed to evoke the 1930s while sitting on modern chassis. Their final cars were beautiful, flamboyant, and wildly expensive, built not for the market, but for a handful of believers. When those buyers disappeared, so did the companies. Others faded not because they failed, but because they became redundant. Brands absorbed into corporate groups lost their identities. Their final cars were rebadged versions of something else. Same engines, same platforms, different badge. When those badges disappeared, few noticed. In the early 2000s, the last wave ended. Century-old names quietly shut down with controlled endings. No bankruptcy, no collapse, just a decision made in a boardroom. Their final cars were ordinary sedans, practical, unremarkable, cars designed to offend no one and excite no one. Built not as a farewell, but as inventory, and then it was over. From 1949 to 2006, the final cars of defunct automakers tell a consistent story. Companies rarely die because they can't build cars. They die because the world changes faster than they can adapt. The last car is rarely a masterpiece, it's a mirror. If you ever saw these brands in driveways, in old photos, or on roads that no longer exist, then these cars are part of your memory too. They weren't meant to be remembered, but they deserve to be, because every last car carries something heavier than steel. It carries the end of an idea. If this kind of automotive history matters to you, consider subscribing, and leave a comment below. Which final car do you remember most?